when the big debate about whether to have any NATO expansion was conducted, there were a large number of people in the foreign policy establishment, including President Clinton's Secretary of Defense and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time, who were adamantly opposed to NATO expansion because they said it would lead to disaster, that it would lead to a situation like the one we're facing in Ukraine. So it's not like my view is such a unusual view.
Exactly.
There were many people who made this argument. And one more case or one more example to highlight this, and this is my favorite example, is that the decision to bring Ukraine into NATO was made in April 2008 at the Bucharest NATO summit. And at that summit, both Angela Merkel, who was the German chancellor at the time, and the French president, Nicolas Sarkozy, were opposed to bringing Ukraine into NATO. And Angela Merkel has since said that the reason that she was opposed to bringing Ukraine into NATO is that she believed that Putin would interpret it as a declaration of war. Just think about that. Angela Merkel said she thought that NATO expansion into Ukraine would be interpreted by Putin as a declaration of war, which of course is what happened. But what Angela Merkel was saying, and what all of those individuals who opposed NATO expansion in the 1990s were saying, is the same thing I've been saying since 2014. But as your question points out, something has happened to change things. And what's happened is that we're now in this war. And the big question on the table that will be the big question moving forward is who has blood on their hands? In other words, the question is who is responsible for this disaster? And my view is, and I believe this is Angela Merkel's view, and I believe this is the view of the people in the 1990s who were saying it would lead to disaster. Our view is that it's the foreign policy establishment that pushed NATO expansion to include Ukraine that is responsible for this disaster, that has blood on its hands. They don't want to hear that argument. They, meaning people in the foreign policy establishment. And of course, they view me as a mortal enemy because I am in effect saying they are responsible for this disaster. But the fact is that, in my opinion, as time goes by, more and more people will recognize that the foreign policy establishment of the United States, to include virtually every administration since the Clinton administration, is responsible for producing what's going on in Ukraine today.
Yeah, I mean, it's